Welcome to the X32 soundboard at Grandview Christian Church. So, here are some basics. To start off, we always turn the board on, and it is located in the back corner, reaching down, flip it on. So right now, the board should be powering up, and it takes a few seconds. Watch out, those guys will move on their own. So just something to be aware of. Oh, one over there moved. The mains always turn down every time you turn it on. Now, if we were doing a normal Sunday, you would want to power this up as well. That powers up two of our monitor systems. Those are the speakers that the people on stage listen to. Specifically, it is the monitors located there and there. The monitor right there is powered on its own, but Dale and Cynthia, whoever is playing on that side and those two monitors, won't be able to hear anything. The monitors are numbered 1, 2, 3, and Anthony has 4 over there. He listens through headphones. So all that said, here's our board. Now, a lot of the stuff on here isn't that important if you're just getting started in running the board. But here are some of the basics. Each of these channels are labeled different things. Some of them we use, some of them we don't regularly use. And so it all depends on how we have it set up that day. You'll notice the mute buttons are red if the thing is muted. We have been using these channels lately, so they're just all muted. Everything else is unmuted. Now, there are 16 channels here from left to right, not including the buses and stuff on the right, which we'll explain later. Right here, though, takes us to the next row of 16. So when I hit this button, now we have a whole nother row of 16. And for right now, all we're using are the 4 for Anthony's drums. 1, 2, 3, 4. The kick drum, the snare drum, overhead left, and overhead right. So there those all are. Let's go back to our first 16. Now, if this was a normal practice, things you might need to do is mute and unmute. If someone's not there that day, you should just mute it. So let's just say we have no keyboard player this day. I'm going to go ahead and mute the keyboard player, and if the keyboard player is singing, there's muted. Now you'll note that because the keyboard is actually a stereo channel, meaning there's a left and a right, same with our computers, a left and a right. If I hit 1, it mutes both. Don't try and use 2 fingers because it'll actually mute then unmute, so you just want to do the 1 button and call it good. So there's all that. Now, once practice starts, I would turn up my main speakers. Let's take it to -10 right now. You take it to 0, it's called unity. Let's just assume that's going to be loud enough. If overall the whole thing is way too loud, we can turn it down here. Overall too quiet, we can turn the whole system up and down. But these basically is the mix. This is how much keyboard versus tablet versus guitar do we have as we're listening to it. And so this part does take some skill in listening to music, but for the most part, leave it as it is, assuming that it was left on a save setting. And I'll maybe mention how to save and pull up save settings on another time. But if you do feel like, man, I just cannot hear the keyboards, well, you can give it a little bump then. Or maybe it's too much keyboard. Take it down a tiny bit and just see how it sounds. You should be able to hear everyone up on the worship team, but at the same time, there is a balance. You will hear some things louder than others. Whoever is leading the vocals on the song should be louder than those people who are singing backup vocals. Another thing you might need to watch out for is, for instance, let's just say that vocal 4 person here, they're singing backup vocals, and maybe they don't know the song very well, so they're choosing to sing quietly. Well, you might think, well, I can't hear them, so bump them up, bump them up, bump them up. Well, that's great until you get to the next song, and they know the song really well, and they actually start singing at full volume. Next thing you know, they're super loud, and maybe they're singing a harmony, which sounds nice, but it's not really what the people want to follow. They want to follow the lead melody line, the main line of the song. So these really should be set when singers are singing at their loudest or at least the average loud volume they'll be singing at the whole time. So during practice, if you start noticing that the second singer is singing louder than the first, or the fourth is louder, bump them during that time, and then just trust it that if it gets quiet during the worship service, they're probably being quiet on purpose, not that you need to go and keep adjusting it. They're probably choosing to sing quieter for a reason. So definitely make most of your adjustments on vocals when they're singing confidently. You might notice in the guitar, for instance, if they're strumming, it's a lot louder than if they're plucking individual notes. So if a song has a little introduction, you might need to bump the guitar for a little bit. But that's changing levels. That's something that just takes time and practice. Now, here's a few things on the right side of the board that we need to get used to. Or you know what? I'll make that the second video. Nope, I'll make that this video. Isn't that confusing? All right, right side of the board now. So here's just a few things. There are two sections that we really use. Group the DCAs, 1 through 8, buses, 1 through 8. That's mostly what we have to pay attention. And for the most part, we don't even look at the right half. It's really all just these first 4. Now, DCAs control groups. It says groups right there. When I hit this mute drum button, you don't see anything right now, but if I go over to the drums, you'll see the drums are flashing. That means they're muted, and no matter if I hit this button or not, if they're flashing, it's still muted. Now I've actually specifically muted that one, but now they're just muting altogether. Now you'll note if I come over here, watch what flashes when I hit the second one. You get the keyboard, the bass, you get the other instruments. Do this one, you get the other vocals, and do this one, and you get the lead, which would be me right now. You get my vocals, my tabla, and my guitar, all muted. So the whole board is flashing right now. Why use this? Well, here's the thing is, in the past, we had it happen where we would mute everybody during the sermon because you don't want mics on during the sermon. They do pick up sound, and sometimes you'll get hums and noises. So it's best for everything to be muted during the sermon, minus the pastor. But at the end of the sermon, we'd go and we'd, do this, and then we'd realize, oops, I hit this button, and I just left the keyboard muted. And now for the first whole song, there was no keyboard because we accidentally forgot to unmute it. So what the advantage of these guys is I just hit 4 fingers. Every musical instrument and worship thing is now muted. Now what can get confusing is then if we drop over here, those things aren't muted, but we see the flashing. If you see flashing at the board, you got to know that the DCAs are muted. So that's really all we use them, or I use them for, is a group muting function. Now, aside from that, you can actually increase and decrease the drum volume all as one group. So if I go back over to drums, you'll see that these are not all even with each other. But if I go over here and evenly raise this, it'll raise them all up together as one whole group. So that way the ratio of each drum mic sounds the same, but you can overall increase the drums. Last week we had a loud drummer, and so that was turned way down, but we didn't change the ratio of how the drums were mic'd. So now, monitors. This is the last thing we're going to talk about, and it's probably one of the most important as far as helping the worship team get set up. When I go buses 1 through 8, now you see bus 1, monitor 1, Dale. Bus 2, monitor 2, keys. Bus 3, monitor 3, lead. Bus 4, drums. So, now clicking on these, you can mute the monitors. No real reason to mute the monitors for the most part. But now, here's what you need to understand is to edit the monitors. Watch these guys on the left as I do this. I want to make sure that Dale's monitor is set correct. I'm going to select his monitor. And now I'm going to say send on fader. And watch what happens over here on the faders. They all change a ton. Now, this is where it can be very tricky. Keep your eye out for these buttons being lit up. Because right now, what I'm adjusting does not affect the speakers. It affects Dale's monitor. And so, right now, as you can see, Dale has some keyboard, some guitar. Dale doesn't have any tablet. He doesn't need any tablet. He's got my vocals in there loud, and he's got himself nice and loud. You go over to drums. He actually has drums in his monitor. Interesting. I would assume he wouldn't need them or want them, but there we go. So now I can either turn this off, and now it's back to, this is the normal mix that we hear out the speakers, even though that's still selected. But I can also go and see what Cynthia's monitors look like, what Joe's monitors look like, and what Anthony's monitors look like. You'll note that Anthony only has a couple things in there, mostly my vocals, my guitar, and a little bit of keyboard, and that's usually all he needs to lead, and he's got himself in there, not very loud. You go over to my vocals, or mine, you'll notice I have all the drums muted. I don't want to hear the drums. I stand next to them. I come over here, and you'll see that my tablet's pretty loud, my guitar, my vocal. In fact, I'm going to go like this because I remember last week I could use a little more vocal. Now, if someone says, Cynthia says, I can't hear my keyboard well enough, can we please increase it in the monitor? You go find Cynthia's monitor, make sure the sends on fader is lit. You would go find her keys, and you notice her keys are right now way up high. You'd turn them up a little bit more. If she says, I can't hear the guitar, well, we could turn the guitar up at that point. And then Dale says, oh, there's too much drums in my monitor. Well, that's fine. We'll go over to Dale's. We'll go to the drums. Hey, and I'll just mute the drums because Dale probably doesn't even want them in his monitor. But that's how to set up the monitors. Now, if you can change the levels during the service, mute and unmute the different tracks during the service, and make sure that the DCAs, if we mute when the sermon starts, mute those DCAs. When the sermon's over, unmute the DCAs. You pretty much can run this for the show. Most all these other buttons, they're for fine-tuning stuff, and that takes a lot of practice and a lot of know-how. But just to run a Sunday service, these are the basics that you need to know.